everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Warwick F1 show. I will be your host for this episode, Callum J. Hodge. And today we're going to be talking about our previews for the Japan Grand Prix. Obviously, we've come off of a very exciting Australian Grand Prix. If you haven't already checked out our reviews from that and talking about how our predictions got on, then make sure to check that episode after this one. But going into this race in Japan, obviously another early start, not as early as Australia for us European viewers at 4 a.m, but still 6 a.m, a very early start. But we know that Max Verstappen, maybe not having the most comfortable start of the season as probably he would have liked. Obviously, a reliability issue kicking off his first few laps at the Australian Grand Prix. Now, although we possibly hope that the Ferraris might be quite a lot closer to him this season and may be able to challenge for that win and keep the championship battle a little bit interesting, at least while it still is, before we perhaps expect Verstappen to walk away with it later on in the season. We do know that Verstappen has been quite dominant here in the past few years. It seems that every time Verstappen has possibly an off period, it's usually Japan where he comes back into the running and gives another performance that dominates over the entire rest of the field, even his teammate Checo Perez. However, we do know that his competitors are going to be very strong around this circuit, as we can say that Australia is possibly a very similar style of circuits to Japan. And so we know that the Ferrari has performed around around tracks like Japan with their good showing in Australia. Obviously, lots of high-speed corners. And so we can maybe expect a similar showing of pace to what we saw in Australia. So obviously we had very strong Ferraris. The McLarens also showing their strong and that they have good confidence and consistency in their car, possibly as compared to how they've started off the season in previous years, and perhaps more struggles for the likes of Mercedes. But we do also know that they're bringing in, that teams are bringing in a number of different upgrades for this race, Red Bull and Ferrari inclusive. So we may see that difference in pace change up quite a bit as well. This race is obviously is also a lot earlier in the season compared to in previous years. So we know that Verstappen has actually won the championship, I believe, in 2022. He actually won it at this race after his dominant period, after his close battle with Lewis Hamilton the previous year. So he actually won it in 2022. And so we don't know how, with the Japan being a lot earlier on the season, how maybe different teams will shape up their strategies. There'll obviously be a lot less of prioritizing certain drivers for the world, for the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships, as it's we're not running out of races for the end of the season. But there's certainly a lot to look forward to in this race. And so we'll be talking about a few of these things that we're looking forward to in our Japan Grand Prix. And we'll also, of course, be doing our predictions. And I have the luxury of judging these predictions completely freely without having to do any of my own for this race. So if I come to you guys then, I haven't actually said who I'm joined with yet. I'm, of course, joined with the two Wills and Chinmay as well. And so if I come on to you guys, I think what would you say is exactly the things that are most to look out for, particularly in this Japanese Grand Prix?
Well, I think for me, it's the time that it is taking place in the season. Traditionally, at least for the last decade or so, the Japanese Grand Prix has been around October time, has been kind of that last stop around Asia before we get into the Americas and the Middle East to finish off the season. But this year, it has moved to April. Has moved to April to try and avoid some of the typhoons that we've seen in the past. Obviously, we had 2019 qualifying was cancelled on the Saturday, was rescheduled for the Sunday morning, and then we have had some incidents in the past that have been a bit more tragic. It is the 10-year anniversary of the passing of Jules Bianchi following his crash at Suzuka into a tractor. And we saw another example of the potential risks involved with that sort of thing in 2022 with Pierre Gasly. So there has been that push to move the race to a time of the year when that kind of risk of rain or heavy rain has been or has is lessened. And yeah, I'm very interested to kind of see how that will kind of shape out or shake out the race. Obviously, we saw in Australia perhaps some teams prioritizing safety over maybe competing, and you may see the same thing here, but it's Japan, it's Suzuka, it's a traditional circuit, lots of fast corners, and I'm sure it will be a good one.
I think it'll be really interesting to kind of see how McLaren do here. I think they were really strong here last year. So seeing if they can maybe catch up with Ferrari a little bit, even see if Ferrari can catch up a little bit with Red Bull, just on general pace, not just in the racing, also qualifying, maybe try and get that first pole of the season that isn't Verstappen. But we know Verstappen's really strong here. So maybe less how he does and more how Perez does, having had like a two good solid starts to the season. But after a bit of a poor show in Australia, maybe how does he bounce back as well?
Yeah, now for me, it's more interesting to see, how Checo is going to be doing relative to Max, especially being one of Max's strongest circuits, and particularly, like Will said, it's all about McLaren. I think this track might be more about McLaren in terms of the second and third place, whether McLaren and Mercedes could actually make that catch up on a track that might be bit more suited to their cars more than Ferrari, comparing the last 2 seasons. And also for me, I suppose one more person to add on is whether is the pressure that's now really being added to Danny Ricciardo. Because now, obviously, considering his really poor showings in the first 3 races of the season, the way Yuki Tsunoda's just completely mincemeated him, pretty much. It's going to be a interesting to see, especially we're seeing now rumors of Helmut Marko potentially laying an ultimatum to the Honey Badger now.
Yeah, some more really good points there. Obviously, with Will saying that the race is now being moved to a lot earlier in the season, and so maybe that chaos that Japan can bring with the unpredictability of weather. Obviously, we've had rain in the past few seasons, which has really shaken up the pecking order. So maybe in the next in 2 weekends' time, when we have the Japanese Grand Prix, it's maybe more of a consistent and stable Japanese Grand Prix than we've seen previously, if you can even call that circuit predictable and stable. But certainly, as we've mentioned, there's definitely a lot of points to be proven in terms of the way the grid's shaping up. So we know that Ferrari have shown some very good pace in terms of when Verstappen is off the track, and we even argued, I think you could even argue, as I think Martin Brundle did, that maybe Sainz, if he was competing in Saudi Arabia, then he could even be ahead of Max Verstappen at this point in the championship. So there are definitely the potential for switch up of orders in Japan. We may see the Ferraris possibly challenging the Red Bulls, and McLaren's even getting in there as well as a kind of close three-way scrap for the lead. And then also there is some other points to be proven as well, as you mentioned, Daniel Ricciardo. And so I just another question I'd say that I have for you guys is, coming out of these last few races that we've seen the results from and the different performances in the car, what particular drivers, I know we've already mentioned Ricciardo and I would personally argue Mercedes as well, in which who exactly has the most to prove in these coming races, and who really needs this point with the Japanese Grand Prix to really be a turnaround for the next few races of the season?
I mean, you mentioned them there. I think Mercedes, and now it's very much getting towards panic stations in terms of them performing. Like you've got Red Bull, obviously, who are perhaps far and away the best team, at least definitely on the Verstappen side of the grid. But more, or at least you're looking towards maybe the teams that they thought were going to be their rivals. Ferrari and McLaren, and Ferrari in particular, miles ahead of where Mercedes seem to be. McLaren as well seem to be putting points between themselves and Mercedes. And George Russell has had a fairly so-so start to the season. I mean, we obviously saw that crash in Australia. Lewis Hamilton has had, I think, even by his own admission, an uncharacteristically bad start to the season. He said it was worse than 2009. And if we look back to how bad that McLaren was at the start of that season, that is quite a statement to make. So if Mercedes don't start to perform, you are going to start to see that gap grow. And if they can only get points for seventh and eighth, that's not many points for them to recover, and the gap is going to grow. So I think personally, and perhaps as a Hamilton fan as well, Mercedes really need to perform here. Otherwise, there is potentially a big problem facing that Brackley outfit.
Yeah, I think Lewis, especially in terms of Mercedes, has a bit to prove. He's had not the strongest qualifyings and even race performances, as you said, especially by his standards. I think Logan Sargent's got a lot to prove after being taken out of the car and being told, no, we're not going to race you this week. We're going to race your teammate, even though he crashed. I think it's a big weekend for him to kind of come out and say, no, I'm going to kind of put my best foot forward, show why I should have been racing, especially at a track where he really struggled last year. He crashed out in qualifying, I think it was. So it'll be really interesting to see how he does. And I'd like to see a bit more out of Lance Stroll, maybe a little bit closer to Alonso, kind of especially in race trim, and maybe try and push on and get a few more extra points here and there.
Yeah, no, actually, yeah, well, yeah, I was actually also going to bring up Lance Stroll, but yeah, no, we've already covered that anyway. But yeah, both Mercedes drivers both got their reasons, obviously, and the team as a whole really need to get, a move on now, especially, you know, this is their make or break year for the rest of the regulations, and the fact that also they do seem to be struggling without some of the key members. For example, James Vowles, who I believe was the head of strategy at Mercedes before he left for Williams, and so I just don't feel like there's enough boldness in that team, personally speaking. But in general, obviously, they're still trying to they're still trying to figure out how to use their the new design, the new chassis, and because obviously this is the first full winter they've had with the new design and everything as well. And so, yeah, there's not really much more to add in terms of who we need to look at.
Yeah, certainly. I think Mercedes is definitely the one that a lot of people have got their eye on. And what's probably more worryingly is we've clearly seen that it's not really down to any sort of kind of chance or just kind of a bit of unluckiness, I guess you could say, from the past races. It really has been a lack of pure pace. And so that will be the really worrying thing for Mercedes that they want to try and turn around. As Toto Wolff has said, you've had plenty of examples, for example, McLaren last year, where the turnaround in pace can happen very quickly. And so there is still that potential for them, but there is certainly going to be a lot of pressure on them. And as we mentioned before, all these drivers, Lance Stroll, Daniel Ricciardo is obviously the other big one. He could potentially be needing to perform this time for his actual seat in the next couple of races. So there's certainly a lot to look forward to in this weekend, as well as our wonderful predictions, which we shall now come on to. So as I said, I'm now going to be judging them. So what we're going to be essentially doing, for any new viewers, we're going to be predicting our top 5 race drivers, and we're also going to be predicting a 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point predictions, where the more points you get, the more unlikely the prediction is going to happen. And we also do for our first place a snake format. So this week, who is has the luxury of predicting first place first? It is Will. So we all know, is it going to be the predictable first place?
I think I've sort of been bullied into it, saying that if I don't pick him, I may be.
No, you can go for something else. You'll just look really silly when he wins.
Exactly. I don't want to look silly. No, well, as much as I want to say that Ferrari will do well, I'm not confident enough, especially in Japan, that Verstappen isn't going to win. It's still kind of boring, but yeah, I'm going to go with the Max Verstappen P1.
No, that's fair enough. I guess quite difficult to try and predict anything else as much as it may seem like something but everyone is going to be doing that at the pace that he's showing despite his DNF last race. And then if we could have your other top, we'll actually do Chinmay next. So you are the second person to choose. So who have you gone for your first place?
I'll just basically go for the other Red Bull, Checo again. But yeah, to be honest, it was just more of a random choice, to be honest.
Yeah, I suppose, and maybe a circuit which, with being a tight circuit, hopefully one that he can thrive at, especially in the pace that we know that Red Bull has got. And then finally, Will, the two Red Bulls have been chosen. Who are you going to put your money on?
I think naturally when the two Red Bulls get chosen, you kind of look towards the Ferraris. I've always been a massive Ferrari fan, so I'm going to back them all the way. I'm seeing Will's face looking really skeptical at the moment there, but no, I think you look towards the Ferraris when Red Bulls get chosen. So I'm gonna go for Charles Leclerc. I think he's not got the worst chance in the world. I do get why Will maybe has hesitated before picking Verstappen, but I think out of the two, Leclerc has tended to be the faster one, so he's probably the better choice to make. So yeah, Leclerc P1.
I mean, yeah, I can certainly get that way. You would turn to the Ferraris when the Red Bulls have been chosen. They have certainly, at least for the first few races, cemented themselves as that team in second place in the constructors. And Charles Leclerc, obviously not the driver that won for our last race, but he's obviously proven that he can win races before, and so I'd say that's definitely not a bad shout for third place. And then we'll now go through our second to fifth and also our 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point predictions for the race. So, Will, what have you got for us?
Yeah, so for my top five, I've got Verstappen first, obviously. Then I've got Leclerc second. Then Norris third. I don't think we're going to have a 2x2x2 this week. I think it's going to be a lot closer, especially between Ferrari and McLaren. Then Sainz, then Piastri. I think that's going to be my top kind of five. I think the two stronger drivers, especially at this track, will kind of prevail, and then we'll get kind of their teammates behind them battling it out. And then do you want my predictions as well? Or
yeah, sure, go for it.
So my 1 point, which is maybe slightly brave, is that the driver who gets pole doesn't win. So I'm thinking that we might get a Ferrari pole, maybe Leclerc pole, or even a shock Perez pole, although qualifying is not exactly his strong suit. Then my 2-pointer is that both Alpines get into Q2. We saw one of them do it last week. I'm thinking maybe similar sort of track, Gasly might have a bit of a better weekend. You never know. And then my 3 point is very specific, but it's a Mercedes driver calls a car that's just overtaken it a rocket or rocket ship, because they love to do that every time they get overtaken. It's, oh mate, that car's a rocket ship. So that's my 3 point prediction.
I mean, certainly it's. I think it's. I've definitely known Hamilton doing that in the past, but I think both drivers certainly did that in Australia. Something that's pointing out to me on first notice that despite Sainz coming back from appendicitis and having a dramatic comeback to get first place over the kind of all the other drivers apart from Verstappen, obviously, he's still yet to maybe be put above Leclerc in our predictions. As I think last week we obviously put Leclerc, or most of us put Leclerc before Sainz, and we were obviously proven wrong. But perhaps it will be different around this time in Japan. So then, Chinmay, have you got anything similar or different to Will in that department?
Mine's a bit different, and funny you say no one's put signed above Leclerc. Well, I'll go through I'll go from obviously first place. I did say Checo. Second place, I put Lando Norris because I'm probably feeling quite confident in McLaren this week, and considering how good they were last year. And this track really does fall on McLaren's strength on high-speed corners. They're normally very, very good at those tracks. So that's why I'm putting my confidence in McLaren for Norris in second. Third, I have for Carlos Sainz from recent form, and also he does well. He does do well in Japan as well. So normally, because I think he was 2022, he was second until he spun off in the wet. At that point, fourth place Oscar Piastri, and fifth place Charles Leclerc. I don't know. That's just going from my gut feeling. I just feel McLaren are just going to move stronger this weekend. And you probably have noticed that there is an omission in that point. My thinking is if Verstappen's either going to be first or last. First or doesn't finish. I don't see anything else. I feel that confident Verstappen's going to be first. There's no point putting him anywhere else. So I'll try and take a bit of an extra risk and, at least get 3 pointers elsewhere. Oh yeah, and then for my 1 pointer, I've just gone a simple safety car in the race. I think I need to play a little bit more safe on this one. My 2 pointer, I've got Verstappen on pole by over 3/10, if that's a solid prediction. And then my 3 pointer, it doesn't seem as much, but considering the other two Ferrari customer teams are Haas and Sauber, I've got at least 4 Ferrari engined cars, and I've at least got. I'm thinking whether to put 4 or 5 Ferrari engined cars in the points.
I think 4 would probably be
Yeah.
for a 3-pointer.
Four
Okay.
is fine. We had to have like 3 DNFs to get both Hassets
Yeah.
last week.
Yeah.
True. That's very true. So yeah, I thought a 3-pointer that maybe not be a flat out 3-pointer, but at least it's still out there, but still possible. So yeah.
Yeah, certainly. I agree. Certainly possible. Obviously, last week we saw Haas return a double points finish in Australia, which we obviously know is uncharacteristic, judging how much they like to have tyre-related DNFs there. And they've certainly started the season off a lot better than what they have done in previous years. And I think we just showed there that we can maybe expect something very similar to Australia in terms of both McLaren's and Ferrari's finishing quite high up, especially due to the similar nature of the circuits in relation to the high-speed corners compared to in comparison between Australia and Japan. So, Will, are you going to walk along quite similar lines to Will and Chinmay, or are you going to go completely different? What have you gone for?
I'd say I've gone fairly similar. So obviously I put Leclerc P1 and bringing up the not putting like Sainz in front of Leclerc. I have gone Sainz P2. So I mean, perhaps if Sainz does perform better than Leclerc, does manage to get that P2, there is a potential. I've gone away from what Chinmay's put. I mean, he's gone very hero or zero in terms of where Verstappen's gonna be. I've decided to bank on a point. I made this mistake earlier in the season. So if he's in the top five, I'm going to bank on a point, and I think third place for me is the one that's very up in the air. So I've decided to put Verstappen there, and then also going off McLaren's strengths at this track, I've gone for Norris and Piastri, P4 and P5, trying to kind of gauge where they'd be if they were strong. For my 1 point, I've gone away from the racing quickly, and I've said we're gonna see a cool fan hat. The Japanese, they love their F1 and they love we've seen hats in the past. I remember one that was like a DRS activated hat made by someone. It was an incredible hat, and I think we're gonna get another one on the broadcast at some point during the weekend. For my 2-pointer, and this is thinking back to last year, when we had a Carlos Sainz win after a bit of a kind of disappointing Max Verstappen performance. Verstappen came out the next race at Japan, blew everyone away, and I've gone for a Verstappen Grand Slam for my 2-pointer. I think he's going to get his second one of the season potentially, and then for my 3-pointer, and this is kind of covering my bases a little bit because I've put Norris and Piastri P4 and P5 in my top 5 predictions, but for my 3-pointer, I've gone for a double McLaren podium. I think potentially they could end up with both drivers on the podium, especially if they are as strong as they were last season. And yeah, so that is what I've gone for, covering the bases a little bit, but I like my chances with a few of those predictions.
Yes, some very interesting predictions indeed. Certainly one of the most creative 1-point predictions I've seen since I've been on this podcast, not driver or team related, but fan related. I do very much like that. Hopefully we will see that at some point on the broadcast during the weekend. And again, just kind of assuming the confidence that we have in Ferrari and McLaren as cementing themselves firmly as, by the very least, that second and third place position, and almost really highlighting as well the lack of confidence that we have with Mercedes, that they are almost nowhere near that kind of top 3 position. I mean, you could say that for maybe Aston Martin as well, but almost with Mercedes, I guess you could expect that a little bit more, because we obviously know what they've been capable of over the past few years. And so really highlighting the problems that Mercedes have, and possibly showing the gulf that they have to overcome to bridge that gap and get more closer to the McLaren and Ferraris. But some excellent predictions there. We shall see, obviously, in 2 weeks' time on the podcast reviewing this Grand Prix, how those predictions get on. But does anyone else have anything else they'd like to add?
I think Japan, I think it'll be a good one, an early one, as we're kind of going through that period where all the races are a bit early, but definitely one that I'll wake up for at 6 a.m., which is much more tolerable than 4 a.m. that we had to deal with last week.
Couple of hours extra sleep, but then one of those hours is actually going to be taken away from daylight saving times, which I've just remembered. So it's going to perhaps be a bit more painful than it could be, but oh well. So anyway, so we will leave it there. I hope everyone listening has enjoyed our Japan preview. I hope you're all ready to get up at 6 a.m. and watch the race live. But anyway, we'll round off the podcast episode there. I've been your host, Callum J. Hodge, and until next time, goodbye.